We start in South Korea, where the Constitutional Court has upheld the impeachment of President Yoon Suk-yeol. The decision means he's been removed from office and elections will be held within 60 days. The judges unanimously found Mr. Yoon's short-lived attempt to impose martial law last year violated the Constitution. The declaration in December sparked chaos before it was overturned by Parliament and Mr. Yoon was impeached. Well, these were the scenes on the streets of Seoul as critics of Mr. Yoon celebrated when they heard the decision. Well, how did his presidency end up in disgrace? Well, on December the 3rd last year, President Yoon declared martial law in a televised address. The next day, lawmakers voted to rescind Mr. Yoon's order and martial law was lifted. On December the 7th, Mr. Yoon survived the first impeachment vote, but a week later he was then impeached by Parliament. Then, on December the 31st, a district court issued a warrant to detain Mr. Yoon. 2 weeks later, the Constitutional Court held its first formal hearing into the case. The following day, Mr. Yoon was arrested after a weeks-long standoff. Then, earlier this week, on April the 1st, the Constitutional Court said it would announce its decision to uphold Mr. Yoon's impeachment today. Well, our chief presenter, Steve Lai, is outside the court in Seoul. Steve.
Yeah, hi, Tig. It's been a remarkable day here in South Korea, and you can't underestimate how big a deal this is for the president, for that impeachment ruling to be upheld. Now, that verdict came in just over 2 hours ago when the 8 justices all sat in the building just behind me, decided unanimously to uphold that impeachment charge. Now, when that moment happened, when they announced that, there was loud cheers that we could hear, even though there is a 150-meter cordon around where I am at the Constitutional Court. I could still hear where the protests were being carried out. I could still hear a loud cheer erupt from all those that wanted this impeachment to be upheld, that wanted President Yoon to be taken out of office. And there is a celebratory mood amongst those supporters of that decision to impeach President Yoon that we were showing earlier. Now, there are, of course, those pro-Yoon supporters that wanted to see the impeachment overturned. There's a whole line of flowers dedicated to President Yoon just to my left, lining up the wall of the Constitutional Court, all saying President Yoon does not deserve to be impeached, saying that President Yoon should remain as president. But for those supporters, they have been left dejected and deflated by this Constitutional Court's ruling. Now, there had been a significant police presence here in Seoul, and there still is. 14,000 police were mobilized to make sure that whatever the verdict was going to be, that there wasn't going to be any disruption, there wasn't going to be any violence. And the concerns were real, because back in 2017, when Park Geun-hye was impeached, it did result in some violence. Some protesters then, 4 of them, died in scuffles with police. So the prospect of potential violence was real, and it still could be. We still haven't seen things all play out here today. This ruling only came in 2 hours ago. Now, Mr. Yoon was stripped of his duties, as you alluded to, Tig, there, running through the timeline of how this all happened. Now, the pressure in South Korea had been ramped up with the time that had passed since the last hearing by the Constitutional Court up until the decision. It was about 38 days. Now, when Park Geun-hye was impeached back in 2017, that time was only 11 or so days. So the further this got stretched out and drawn out, it really did sort of amplify the stakes and the tension here in South Korea. But that tension has now been broken by this decision by the Constitutional Court. And our Seoul correspondent, Jean McKenzie, takes a look back at how we got here and what happens next.
A night that stunned the country and the world. Troops stormed South Korea's parliament as the president ordered a military takeover.
비상계엄을 선포합니다.
This evoked ghosts of Korea's violent, authoritarian past. The people and politicians resisted, forcing Mr. Yoon to retract martial law just 6 hours later. In the days that followed, hundreds of thousands took to the streets until Parliament voted to suspend him. Today, the courts have upheld that decision. After months of deliberation, Mr. Yoon has been permanently removed from office. This was a desperate gamble by a deeply unpopular president. Once a successful prosecutor from a well-off family, Mr. Yoon proved to be an ineffective politician. He clashed with his powerful opposition party, accusing them of paralysing the country. John Linton is a Conservative politician who's close to the president.
In his toolbox, he saw this martial law as a method for punishing the opposition. From logically or reasonably speaking, it was a poor decision. It lacked wisdom. And he is paying the consequences for it now.
Mr. Yoon is also facing life in prison. He's been charged with insurrection in a separate ongoing criminal case. Last month, he was released from detention ahead of his trial, to the delight of his loyal supporters. As this crisis has dragged on, these crowds have become more agitated and extreme. Buying into far-right conspiracy theories, the president himself has dangled. Today's impeachment is not what they were hoping for, and South Korea, more polarised than ever, is now bracing itself for unrest. Jean McKenzie, BBC News, Seoul.
Yeah, so I was talking earlier about Yoon's supporters and how they might react. Well, I've just seen on our live page, Yoon's supporter has been arrested for damaging a police bus window not too far from the Constitutional Court. And now that happened earlier. That's one incident, but they have been fairly subdued so far from what we've gathered. Whether that remains the case, we'll have to wait and see. But in the meantime, you know, those that were keen to see this impeachment upheld, those are the ones that are celebrating, and those that were keen to see President Yoon keep his position as president, those are the ones that are sad and dejected.
Steve, what's likely to happen, though, to Yoon's political movement? As we've seen that he does still have supporters, is there another figurehead who could replace him and represent him in politics?
Well, that's a big question. What does the party, what does the PPP do now that he has no chance of, now that he's been removed from office? Will they try and distance themselves from what has just happened, or will they try and leverage on the support that he does have and that we've seen that he has, and try and find a successor in that regard? For President Yoon himself, he still faces criminal charges or insurrection charges for his actions over that declaration of martial law back in early December. So he's going to be having court cases and potential trials, you know, once they started picking up. And now the fact that he's no longer the president, it means he doesn't have any of the protections that being president would afford him. So that means that he is potentially going to be tied up with a lot of court proceedings going forward. Whether that's too much baggage for the PPP going into this next election, which, as we mentioned earlier, has to be held within the next 60 days. Well, that remains to be seen. Hopefully we'll get a clearer picture when the PPP, his party, starts making more statements following what we've seen play out today with this Constitutional Court upholding that impeachment vote.
Indeed, as you say, a presidential election has to happen within the next 60 days. How would you gauge support, the scale of support for the PPP and the other runners and riders who will be participating in that election?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we were talking to analysts earlier as soon as the impeachment came out, and I was asking them about the popularity that now former President Yoon has, and they were saying something quite interesting, but consistently as well amongst the various people that I was speaking to. And they said when the impeachment happened, there was almost unanimous thought that President Yoon had overstepped the mark, that he needed to be impeached, he needed to be removed from office. But as time went on and as this case got drawn out more and more, there was a sense of a shift in sentiment, and whether it was a good narrative, whether it was through pushing of the narrative from President Yoon's camp to say that the actions that he took were again, you know, he wanted to protect the country from North Korean sympathizers or from anti-state actors. He seemed to be getting more and more support as time went by. But ultimately, polling suggested just before the Constitutional Court that 55% or over wanted him to be impeached, and he only had support from 30 to 35%. So there was what started off as being quite unanimous against President Yoon seemed to shift as time went by. Now that he has been impeached, though, we'll have to wait and see what the polling will suggest and whether or not that will then determine which direction the party wants to take. For the opposition, obviously they'll be wanting to make hay with this. They'll be wanting to go full steam ahead, projecting that, see what happened with the PPP, see what happened with now former President Yoon. We are the party to take things forward. So, there's going to be a lot of politicking going on over the next 60 days when this election is going to take place. We don't know when it's going to happen, obviously. It could take place sooner, but it has to happen within 60 days. So the political scene and the political maneuverings are going to be something to watch here in South Korea going forward.
Steve Lai in Seoul, thank you very much.